church? Hell no. Are you no longer feeling comfortable in church? This podcast is for individuals who are desperately missing God, but don't know how to find Him. Substance abuse, domestic violence, sex offenses, acrimonious divorce can contribute to discomfort in the church. For these individuals, church is just not an option anymore. Ordained minister Dennis Hall and his guests invite you to listen to this podcast for topics that are inspiring, uplifting, and will bring hope to those who just feel church is not relevant in their lives today.
I'm Dr. Dennis Hall, and I am delighted that you're listening to our podcast today. If you haven't noticed, and how could you have not noticed, we've got a presidential election that's we're only about 2 months away from the national presidential election. In fact, early voting is occurring in the next few days in some places around the country. Now, I noticed that one of the top country recording artists, Jason Aldean, at one of his recent concerts, was challenging the audience at one of his recent concerts to be sure and vote. And he was especially talking to the young people, telling them that their future was at stake. I agree with Jason Aldean. We live in a democratic republic, and one of our freedoms is to elect our leaders. And I got to just tell you, shame on us if we do not exercise that right. You know, we're in the midst of intense political campaigning by the respective candidates for the office of presidents. And many promises and claims are being made in their political rhetoric. And, you know, it appears that almost everyone agrees that the top two concerns in the country are, one, the inflation in the economy, and the other top concern are the concerns about immigration policies and the southern border of the United States. Now, in this podcast, I am not going to wade into the discussion of inflation in our economy. And one of our presidential candidates was president for 4 years, and the other presidential candidate has been vice president for the last 3.5 years. And I think it's clear to everyone that retail prices have skyrocketed over the last 3 years. And, you know, voters will have to decide which one of these candidates has the skill and the leadership and the knowledge to bring our economy under control. Now, since both of these candidates served in the executive branch of our government and have had huge responsibilities for policies that impact our the economy, the only thing that I will say is res ipsa loquitur. Res ipsa loquitur. Now, that's a Latin phrase that means the thing speaks for itself. Yeah, I don't even want to focus on immigration issues that have allowed millions and millions of illegal immigrants into our country over the last 3.5 years. I think the estimated number is about 12 million illegal immigrants. Now, this is a huge problem, of course, and we've seen just assaults, rapes, and murders by these illegal immigrants grow at an exponential rate all across our country. You know, just last week, it was reported that bands of roving illegal immigrants had attempted to commandeer school buses carrying elementary age children. And in Colorado, illegal immigrants have forcibly taken over apartment buildings. And just in the last few days, New York City reported that 75% of their arrests are now illegal immigrants. You know, these things are horrible and are overwhelming to the majority of Americans that feel that our borders should be secure and that all immigrants should go through the lawful immigration process. You know, most of us can't even believe that these things are happening in our country. But what I would like to focus on is some of the extraordinary immorality that's being allowed to occur in America. Now, some of it is related to the open border that's been created by the current administration, and some of it has to do with governmental policies that have been undertaken apparently for political gain. There's an interesting story in 2 Samuel in the Bible where a man known as Nathan the prophet gets to speak to the king. Among other things, in the Old Testament prophets, they spoke the truth of God to others. I like to think of Nathan as a religious leader during the time of King David. Nathan is best remembered for a dramatic speech that he made to King David. Immorality had overtaken King David's palace. And after watching the wife of one of his military leaders bathing, which he could observe from his rooftop, he had her brought to him and entered into an adulterous relationship, and she became pregnant with his child. And he had her husband sent to the front of the battles, where it was almost sure that he would be killed. And that happened. And then he married Bathsheba to cover up his sin. However, the sin was not hidden from God. And the Lord sent Nathan to King David with a message. And Nathan told David a story of two men, a rich man and a poor man. The rich man had a large number of sheep, while the poor man had only one lowly lamb that he loved dearly and treated like his own child. And when a traveler came to stay with the rich man, instead of slaughtering one of his own sheep, the rich man took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the traveler to eat. When King David heard this, he responded with anger and said, "As surely as the Lord lives, this man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan looked at him and replied, "You are the man. You are the man." David had everything and took another man's wife and arranged for him to be killed. David eventually repented of this wrongdoing, and he wrote about it in Psalm 51. And Nathan passed along God's message of forgiveness. However, because of this sin, David's son that he had with Bathsheba died. Now, today, those of us who believe that the Bible is the infallible truth of God have the same tools that Nathan had. And we should be confronting our rulers and leaders when immorality in the eyes of God is being allowed across our land. Most Christians believe that life begins at conception in the womb, not in a petri dish in a lab, but in the womb. It's estimated that approximately 1 million abortions occurred last year in the United States, with 60% caused by medication. Now, what's troubling to me, however, is that there were over 4,000 babies who were 21 weeks or more along in the womb were killed. 4,000, 21 weeks or longer in the womb were killed. I've just taken time to read through the 2024 Democratic presidential platform, and it makes it clear that this party supports abortion, or should I say a woman's right to choose an abortion, even if it's a late-term abortion. We hear the rallying cry of people in this party, of this persuasion, "My body, my choice. My body, my choice." those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ know that God reigns supreme over all of our bodies. He decides when we enter the world and decides when we leave it. I got a feeling that if I tried to commit suicide right here, right now, and my neighbors knew about it, and they and the first responders would intervene. In other words, they would say, no, Dennis, it's not your body, your choice. We're intervening. And, to support any, I should say it another way, to not support any restrictions on abortions is barbaric and immoral. We have the most barbaric abortion policies of any country in the world, and it's just immoral. What is occurring in this country in this regard is immoral. From a Christian point of view, could there have been anything that epitomized the immorality of our current government more than the images of topless transgender individuals dancing on the White House lawn with pride flags flying in the background? And who would have thought Christians would be battling to keep drag queens from conducting storytelling in our public libraries? A couple of years ago, it was reported that male counselors were placed in the same cabins at a camp with fifth grade girls. And when questioned, the camp director said that the state law required them to place staff in the cabins that they identified with. In other words, as long as these biological males said, we're identifying as female, they could be in a cabin with fifth grade girls. Now, this is what I consider to be a shocking example of the immorality that's going on in our countries, but it's not an outlier. In Virginia, a 15-year-old skirt-wearing male was allowed to select the school bathroom of his choosing and then sexually assaulted a female student. The student then transferred to another school where the same boy sexually assaulted another girl in the girls' restroom. And adding insult to injury, not long after this incident, the National School Board Association labeled parents, such as the father of one of these girls, who spoke out against transgender policies and other radical policies at school board meetings, as domestic terrorists. In other words, if you were opposed to this, you're viewed by some as a domestic terrorist. State and national government policies have forced transgender biological males into girls' sports, sometimes even using the same locker rooms as the young women with their male genitals exposed. I just want to throw up my hands sometimes and say, what in the world is going on? Gender identity school policies and practices have become widespread, with books and videos and activities promoting transgender ideologies with students as young as 5 years old. Some of the material contains sexually explicit content. Parents all across the country are battling school boards to fight against this. In many school districts, parents are intentionally left out or left in the dark about the sexual content that's being taught. Often, parents only find out about this from their children, who are confused and distressed about what they're being taught at school. For example, the Washington State Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction forbids teachers from communicating with parents concerning the claimed or coerced identity of their child starting in kindergarten, unless the minor, as young as 5 years old, gives consent. In total disregard for parental authority, school personnel are bound to secrecy concerning the acknowledged and often dramatically celebrated claimed gender identity of these young boys and girls. School is asserting that a student's age and grade level should never be used to justify delaying or denying a student's gender transition. Many schools, children are encouraged to question and discuss with one another what gender identity they plan to select. Now, I don't know what's caused the current preoccupation with gender identity. I have been studying this gender confusion for several years, and the literature is clear that most of this confusion, 95% of it, resolves itself by late teens. In fact, many feel that this discussion of gender identity is fueling confusion in students. Studies have shown that sexually explicit material and pornographic content can contribute to mental problems and life dissatisfaction and improper sexual behavior and pornographic viewing patterns in adulthood. And what about this acceptance of biological males in female locker rooms and bathrooms? What about the privacy and safety of the young women? And if it's, widely agreed that 95% of gender confusion is resolved by late teens, then what are we doing given gender blocking hormones and body change surgeries to children and teenagers? These things have irreversible damage and cause sterilization, let alone the psychological and emotional impact. Christians, we're taught to love everyone, love our enemies. All this includes gays and transgenders. However, we must draw the line when our government is forcing us to say that this is normal. This is not normal. Now, let me get back to the southern border and immigration policy. I think all of us are astonished that more than 2 million illegal immigrants are coming across the southern border each year under our current border policies. In these numbers, there are women and children who are being sexually abused during this journey. Some estimating that more than 50% are victimized. Some families that are sending their family members north on this journey even prepare those traveling for that to happen. And the estimates of those being sex trafficked is mind-boggling. Last year the movie Sound of Freedom was released, and this movie portrayed a truth-based story of children being rescued from sex trafficking. The film highlighted the evils of sex trafficking on our southern border. Now, sex trafficking is part of the human trafficking that occurs on our southern border. Some of the human trafficking creates modern-day slaves who are headed into forced labor in our country. Sex trafficking for adults and children are individuals who are being forced into the sex trades. And there's been a dramatic increase in child sex trafficking since January 2021 due to the de facto open border and the unaccompanied alien children policies. Nearly every number associated with illegal immigration has set historical records each year for the last 3 years. Now, there are many reasons that this is occurring. And part of the reason has to do with the changing cultural and religious landscape in our country. Many in our country today support an open border ignorantly believing that it is morally the right thing to do. And is there anyone who does not believe that America is in a broad decline in our moral standards? You see, these things are linked to human trafficking, and particularly the sex trafficking of children. A recent report on human trafficking estimates that there are over 27 million people in modern day slavery. According to the experts, human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry and rapidly growing. The most heinous part of human trafficking is child sex trafficking. Published estimates claim that 6.3 million people are in commercial sex exploitation, including 1.7 million children. And many experts feel that the numbers are much likely higher. Child sex trafficking is a worldwide evil, but sadly, the United States is the number one destination of trafficked people, and Mexico is the number one supplier. It seems that most people who are concerned about the open border are focused on the millions of illegal immigrants and their impact on our economy and resources, the political system, and the crime rates. But anyone with any kind of moral sensitivity should be outraged, just outraged that the significant growth in child sex trafficking is occurring. Our own government reports reveal that more than 150,000, let me say that again, more than 150,000 unaccompanied alien children have been unlawfully entering the United States each year over the last 3 years. And this does not include children that are in a group that we refer to as the gotaways, the ones that have sneaked across the border in places unobserved. Our government weakened the requirements for background checks on potential sponsors and related adults in these children, and therefore increased the risk for child trafficking. The federal government, our own federal government, has admitted that they've lost track of more than 100,000 of these unaccompanied alien children, and they do not know where they are. Last year, a whistleblower appeared before the House Judiciary Subcommittee and gave this statement. She said, whether intentional or not, it can be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation run by bad actors seeking to profit off the lives of children. She went on to say it is a terrible thing when you blow the whistle to try to save children and you are retaliated against for trying to help. What an awful statement. Since taking office, the Biden-Harris administration has promulgated open borders with a series of stated and unstated policies. Since this administration has taken office, it's estimated that 12 million illegal aliens have crossed the southern border, many of them unaccompanied children. And we seem to be a nation that's losing faith in the value of our heritage. And it's not surprising to witness the erosion of the rule of law and secure borders. There seems to be a new moral order taking place where national sovereignty, the idea of an individual nation's right to protect their own preservation and perpetuation over an amorphous common humanity no longer holds sway. It's the religious community that is the moral compass for a nation. And sadly, last year, the Gallup poll and the Wall Street Journal both published reports revealing a rapid decline in religious faith and patriotism. And there seems to be an emerging watered-down Christianity coupled with the acceptance of socialism and Marxism that is prevailing. As the Judeo-Christian influence declines, these new quasi-religions are not conducive to maintaining the national cohesion that's necessary to impose order on the southern border and stop sex trafficking, especially child sex trafficking. Some will ignore the human catastrophe of human trafficking that is taking place on our southern border and argue that open borders are a form of compassion. But what we're really doing is failing to exercise stewardship over an inherited nation that in the past has been the shining beacon of hope for immigrants. In Psalm 11, 3 and 4, we read, "The foundations of law and order have collapsed. What can the righteous do? The Lord still rules from heaven." Therefore, godly Americans must speak out about the immorality of human trafficking, especially child sex trafficking on our southern border. We should demand that open borders and human trafficking be put in the dustbin of American history, and we should return to the foundations that have sustained America over all these decades. Another immorality that is intertwined in our country's open border policy is the amount of illegal drugs entering our country across the southern border. Now, many, if not most Americans, believe that illegal immigrants are bringing fentanyl and other dangerous drugs over the border, fueling the increase in the overdose deaths. But this is a myth. It's a myth. The truth is, American citizens account for more than 80% of the convictions for drug trafficking. And just last July, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers caught a 20-year-old American citizen attempting to smuggle in 4 million blue fentanyl pills. That's more than a half a ton. The cartels hire American drug mules for many reasons. They're under less scrutiny. They have homes in the U.S. where the drugs can be stashed. They have travel documents. Drugs are much easier to conceal in vehicles. The Border Patrol estimates that only about 2% of hard drugs coming across the southern border are intercepted. But illegal immigrants are only indirectly the problem. The massive problem of illegal immigrants consumes a tremendous amount of our resources that could be used to intercept illegal drugs coming into the U.S. and killing our citizens. In the political campaigning for the presidential elections, we've heard much about a bill that was presented by the Biden-Harris administration as a solution to the border crisis. A close examination of this bill reveals that it would provide billions of dollars to continue to fund sanctuary jurisdictions and non-governmental organizations that have been facilitating this mass illegal immigration. The bill appears to convert the Biden-Harris administration's destructive policies and violations of immigration law into statutes. Statutes meaning law. It actually accepts and codifies crisis levels of daily illegal immigration. It would result in numbers of illegal immigrants that would leave border agents continually overwhelmed. It would continue this ridiculous practice of catch and release, where apprehended illegal immigrants are released into the interior of the United States. The bill expands and codifies this mass parole abuse that is occurring. The language of the bill would encourage asylum fraud. Those who are claiming they're immigrating as an escape from prosecution. The truth is the Harris-Biden administration opened the border and created our country's immigration crisis using only executive, not congressional, only executive authority. And they could end the chaos now with the same executive authority. But they choose not to. They don't need congressional authority to close our border and stop this human tragedy that is occurring. As I said earlier in this podcast, godly people must demand that our borders be closed and our immigration laws be enforced. To do anything else is to be complicit in this human tragedy and the immorality that is occurring on the southern border. Early voting in the presidential election has already begun. And in my opinion, to a large degree, this election is about good versus evil, about immorality versus morality. If America is to survive, it must reverse its moral decline or accept the fact that we will continue to descend into an immoral abyss that at an ever accelerated pace. Not addressing the evils of the open borders certainly hastens America's moral decline. Sex trafficking, especially child sex trafficking, is committed by evil men, women, and organizations. But elite individuals in our government are complicit. They're complicit. Sometimes passive, and at other times active enablers. We must be like the Old Testament prophet Nathan and confront our rulers and leaders about the immoralities in our society. Everyone should be voting in this election. And we should be voting for the leader committed to ending immorality facilitated by our government. You should be haunted by the words of Jesus when he said, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." Matthew 18:6. Now, as I leave this podcast, let me say to you, listener, you be sure to vote. God bless you. And I hope you will join our podcast again in the future.